Good morning.
Good morning, number two. Take two.
Everyone good?
Yeah,
Doing well.
I don't have anybody screaming in the background right now.
Yeah, we have
Still, it's still early.
That's
quieter morning. I know, there's still time.
There's still time.
uh
Uh,
yeah.
Adjusting to the summer schedule, whatever that means, as if it's that much different than what quarantine has been for the last 3 months.
I mean, I don't know about you, but the heat makes me cranky too. Just this oppressive, like, humidity and heat. It just, if I were a kid, I would want to wake up screaming as well. Like,
It's made
Yeah,
me tired, that's for sure.
yeah,
he
it's made me
does.
very tired.
Yeah, and like surprisingly,
Did you bike to church yesterday, Phil? I know you usually do.
this is so ridiculous. I did not because I actually washed my hair yesterday morning, and so then I wear it in a tan when I wash it, so I don't
Uh,
it doesn't drip everywhere, and I can't put a helmet on over my tan.
that's not ridiculous. That's safety. Good
Well,
job, Phil.
safety first.
Safety
Yeah,
first.
that's right. Yeah,
Helmets.
helmets are good.
Always.
Yeah. So
Helmets.
I
I
wouldn't have
actually
biked
drove.
because of the heat. That was the connection in my head, but not because I
Yeah.
just washed my hair. But yeah.
I really have no excuse not to bike to work.
Yeah.
I
You
really,
you don't. You're just too
You
close.
live what, half a mile from church now? What's the actual distance?
yeah, half a mile.
Yeah.
I mean,
But,
mine's only like 2.5 or 3 miles, so it's not like I have much of an excuse either.
but really, half a mile. I mean,
But I know. It's true.
what mugs we drinking out of?
Oh yeah. This is fun because I woke up this morning and I specifically. So this is my Potter's
Ooh.
House mug, and it's not the church Potter's House. The coffee shop that I went to all the time in college, which was kind of a ministry coffee house, was called the Potter's House, and it's really fun because this last week you've seen a lot of people like promoting
Mhm.
black-owned businesses, and they actually highlighted Springfield, Missouri, highlighted the Potter's House, even though it's not actually black-owned, but kind of the face of it was my mentor in college. His name's Samson. There's Thomas, and uh, and so the local news channel did a kind of a deal um, on them on the Potter's House and talking about him and like he's just an incredible guy. He's been there for like 20 years
I
doing
saw
just
that
awesome
story.
work.
It was
Yeah, I posted on Facebook. It was really cool.
really cool.
Hmm.
Rebecca, you drinking out of a mug this morning?
No, I mean, I don't drink coffee or anything in the morning, so I just have my Nalgene water bottle. Same thing every day.
Every day. AmeriCorps. City
Nice.
Square AmeriCorps mug actually this morning. It is yeah, they're doing good work. Talk about folks who are on the front lines. We got AmeriCorps members all over the city working for pennies on the dollar, really volunteering, and that's what it all is about. And they're doing some really incredible stuff, distributing food, making sure kids are eating this summer um, in communities of color, predominantly Hispanic and Black communities. And so, shout out to all the AmeriCorps members. I'm sure you're
Yeah.
listening to the
I
podcast.
mean, I saw write-ups like at the very beginning of the pandemic, before anything even had developed in any other way, just
Hmm.
AmeriCorps members and City Square members, basically in hazmat suits, going to people's houses that they knew were infected with COVID and bringing them like medicine and food and all that kind of stuff.
Do good
It's
work.
amazing.
That's cool.
Started a brand new worship series, friends. It feels good to get out of Eastertide a little bit. Kind of dragged there at the end, thinking about how long the season of Easter is what were we, 6 weeks, 7 weeks?
7 weeks,
That's a
50
long,
days.
that's a
It's the
long
great 50 days.
That's too much resurrection.
two.
I feel like that's a common theme of this podcast. Mitchell is tired of. We should have called the podcast "Mitchell is tired of the current series.
Yep.
Wants to move on."
Yeah, by week 4, it's time to move on. Um, but 7 weeks, woo. That might be one of the longest series, although it wasn't like it was
Lectionary.
mostly a series, but it might be one of the longest series we've had outside of Lent. But here we are in a new one that's only 4 weeks. So getting back into our regular routine.
So as the new one in what I would love to know what led y'all to decide to go into this series. I know you talked about it a little bit at the beginning of your sermon, but like about you talked about the idea of abandoning it potentially, but then staying with it. So what led y'all to dive into this series?
I think one of the driving factors, interestingly, was that some of the work that Victoria is doing with the youth and was going to be doing with the high schoolers in particular when they were headed to DC, their mission trip was going to be basically intersecting with politics and social justice, and how the church can be part of both of those and should be part of both of those. And so she said that it's really important to her to, present to everybody, but especially young people, that mission trips are not about we as the privileged go and help others, kind of the savior approach to mission, and instead it's very relational. And so that led us to, like, people throw around this phrase of God helps those who help themselves. Phil is clapping for that on the on the Zoom. So, I mean, that made me think of a book that I had read, which is Half Truths by Adam Hamilton, that was just really helpful. I know Adam Hamilton is not everybody's favorite, but I think he has a lot to say, and it's in a very straightforward way that's approachable for people who may not be open to those ideas otherwise. So that book, Half Truths, really breaks open. What I appreciate is he's not just like, these phrases are terrible, they're totally wrong, how could you think these things were in the Bible, you're stupid. He actually says, no, they're half true. There are scriptures in the Bible that would lead you toward this theology, but let's just turn it on its ear a little bit and, listen to how God might be actually calling us to use them. So, for example, everything happens for a reason. There are places in the Bible where God is presented as omnipotent and, crafting like a potter crafts clay, speaking of the potter's house. But then how do we use and misuse that phrase? So I like the complexity of it.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where I was kind of looking at what some other churches were doing in terms of worship series, and I'm a big Matt Miofsky fan. And his preaching is really straightforward, and I think it's one of the reasons they're seeing incredible growth in their church. And so they did a series off of this book that kind of like spurred my interest. And I also think it's a good summer series. Like, some of our series really are dependent on being engaged throughout the 4 weeks. Like, sometimes we'll have some more complex ideas that we're trying to like get across, or we just feel called as a staff to really like dive deep into a theme or a season. I think what's great about this series is that you can just one of the worships, the sermons at least, but also just a worship experience, and walk away with something that isn't totally dependent on the previous week. And I like that approach to summer because everyone's pulled in 100 different directions, and we want people to stay as engaged as possible, as possible. But if folks are like missing 3 weeks, and then you're in a series that really requires the first 3 weeks to like get the fourth week, like, I think it makes sense to kind of peel back, speak more simply over the summer, and really encourage people to stay engaged. I find summer is an easy time for folks to just stop engaging. And so we have a responsibility, I think, as worship leaders and staff of churches, is try to like not let people off the hook, but make the space as accessible as possible, spiritually and theologically, as we can in the summer.
So Phil, you mentioned right before we started recording that you found the first hymn really interesting in light of this series. Say more about that. What was hitting you in the feels yesterday with the How Firm a Foundation?
Well, and so before I jump into that, like, I think what's really interesting to me is, like, both of you guys know, but probably everybody doesn't know, that I'm way more of a teacher than a preacher, right? And so, like, I've taught this book or these ideas before, but I've never engaged in a full worship series built around it. And so that's one thing that I love about this, is that you're taking something that's a really great discussion conversation or piece, whatever, and actually building entire worship services around it, which I think you do beautifully. So in that first hymn, that's what I thought, right? Like, in verse 2, the last line in verse 2 says, "Upheld by my righteous, omnipotent hand," which I think is a really, I almost said faint. Interesting. Omnipotent is a really interesting word in that it's one of the omni terms that we often attribute to God.
What's your
Um,
favorite omni term?
Probably omnipresent.
Yeah.
The other one being omniscient, right? So
Yeah,
all seeing, all present, all knowing, basically.
All powerful.
all
All
powerful.
powerful.
Yeah, and I think omnipresent actually leads to omniscience for me as well, but I don't
Mhm.
think that means omnipotent. So the fact that omnipotent was the one that was put in there is interesting because in the theodicy question, kind of what often gets the question that arises is, can God be all powerful and all loving? And so to have that in this, and I think that goes along with this idea of, does everything happen for a reason, right? If God's all powerful, then well, of course, because God is, like you said, Mitchell, in your sermon, like puppeteering almost, right? But then the next verse goes on to talk about, when through the deep waters I call thee to go, the rivers of woe shall not thee overflow, for I will be with thee, thy troubles to bless, and sanctify to thee thy deepest distress, right? Like then there's this like, that is the omnipresence piece of it, right? And then even beyond that, it talks about in verse 4, the flame shall not hurt thee. I only design thy dross to consume and thy gold to refine, which took me back to Luke, which we talked about, a couple weeks ago. But yeah, I don't know. I just thought like, when you were singing the hymn yesterday, I thought like, oh, that word just really jumped out to me because it's like something that always catches my attention whenever it's used theologically. Um, so from the very opening hymn, you've already created this tension for me, this worship service has now engaged me beyond just the idea of thinking, but then like, how am I moved by a song, and what is the tension I push against with this song, but then continue to be moved beyond just my thoughts with the hymn.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, you drew out, those middle three verses, that it creates a tension in and of itself that I don't think it's meant to resolve. Is it presents God as omnipotent, but then it says, "When through fiery trials thy pathway shall lie." It does not say
Mm,
like I cause fiery trials necessarily. It says, I design these things to be used for your good. But I don't, it's interesting that it doesn't really claim that God or Jesus is um, creating the fiery trials. So I thought that was
yeah.
interesting.
And my grace all sufficient shall be thy supply.
Mm-hmm. This is
Yeah.
one of my favorite hymns. Ugh, so rich. But yeah, and then we carry that into the call to worship, right? So the I Phil, as you mentioned, before, I think y'all talked about this one day when I was out too, but I write most of the liturgy. Sometimes I pull from sources like the Iona community, Taizé community, things like that have really beautiful written liturgies. But yeah, so in the call to worship, saying again, asking more questions than we answer is really big for me, because I do think that worship should be conversational. Talking about each role of worship has a directional piece. So I talk about this a lot. The difference between like a benediction and a prayer. A lot of pastors, Mitchell, you're really good at delineating this, but a lot of pastors think that they are benedicting, but they're actually just offering a closing prayer, because a benediction talks to the people and a prayer talks to God. Same with the call to worship. Call to worship talks people to people, inviting God's presence into each other's lives. An opening prayer talks from the people toward God to invite. So I think call to worship is really neat when we can say, we ask ourselves questions.
Hmm.
Totally. Well, yeah, and it can be, what's great about the call, especially here at White Rock now, is that it can be as provocative or even more provocative, because the liturgy actually allows for us to corporately say things that we may not agree with.
Hmm.
um and it allows us then to like sit with it, but not take full responsibility of it, but also recognize that the community itself is taking responsibility of it. And I think it's just a really beautiful way to like, we've actually pushed, like, especially I remember like in August we talk about what we do in summer, right? In August we typically or traditionally have gone kind of like little kind of hard in the paint, like we push the envelope in terms of what's preached about. One August we talked about politics and religion, and it was called Oil and Water. Another August we talked about racism, mental health, homosexuality in the Bible. Like it's kind of like our thing. And what's been helpful is that, as the community has really come to appreciate Rebecca's crafting of the calls, it also allows then for us to actually push the congregation to wrestle with things that are uncomfortable because it's corporately claimed. And I think that there's just power in that when we look at liturgy, work of the people, like it gets us to a place where we are encouraging one another to kind of like step out in faith, right? And that's the best thing about a call is, as Rebecca said, it's not a prayer, right? It's a calling of the congregation to open our eyes and be present in this space, see where God is moving or will move, and know that others are being called to the same task. And it's really been helpful. What I mourn in this is that normally um, the call is actually a couple of staff people and a couple of people from the church. So it's not ever been a staff dominated thing. And that's just been the challenge, is that we've lost the community face and voice in the call because of, our current situation. But,
Now my wheels are spinning like, can we get that back?
sure. I mean, yeah, it's just time and energy and like,
Totally.
well, it's been helpful to just see folks in the statement of faith and
That's been
the
cool.
Robies this past Sunday, and it's been nice to turn that back over, find a way to like have the congregation offer that gift.
Yeah. I think too, and Phil, I'm excited about you coming on staff for a lot of reasons, but specifically that you might be able to help bridge some of this. In my conversations with some of our folks, part of what I grieve, and I think we've done an incredible job of moving worship online, but you do lose some things, obviously. And one of them is the approachable nature of our liturgy, because in order to get many voices involved in worship, it does require fluency in technology. And that in itself is limiting, not just by age, but in large part by age. Because to me, it's been important for a long time, pretty much ever since I got here and got to know the community, that we have a pretty age diverse congregation. So having the call to worship be, for example, one staff person, one person in their 70s, and one person who's in like 6th grade, right? And that age diversity is a little bit limited, and it's also about time, right? Because a lot of our young families,
Totally.
it takes, even me, who's done this a long time, if I'm recording a song or a spoken part, it takes me a good 5 or 6 tries to get that recorded in a way that's going to work. So it's just been interesting liturgically to bring in voices with the limitations of, do they have time, or do they have the equipment, or do they have the knowledge and the confidence to be involved technologically?
It's that balance, right? Like between authenticity and not having to be perfect, and having it be accessible. And online has just kind of created a heightened production value on some things because we just need it to be accessible. We need people to be able to hear it clearly because we can't work on the fly to make that happen. And there's this tension, I think, that exists. We're far more produced online now than we actually are in person. And so how do we reclaim some of that? And I think, a dream of mine and would be that we actually also talking about corporate worship as the work of the people and liturgies is like, it would be really cool. I've thought about this for a couple months. I haven't really said it, but like, what would it look like to have workshops where people write the liturgies? Like, we reclaim like significant portions of our liturgies and turn them over to the people to write themselves, and so there's some shared ownership of everything. Rebecca does a really great job of tapping into what actually exists in our community, especially in the calls, so on the Mother Day litanies, the Father Day litanies, all saints litanies are particular to our community in a lot of ways. But how cool would it be if like we could turn over aspects of all of worship to the community, even call to worship's preaching, things like that. It would be a really
Prayers.
prayers.
For sure.
Yeah, definitely. And we have folks in our
yeah.
congregation that write really beautiful prayers, and like, Shelley Ross comes to mind. She's a fantastic writer. And so how do we give that power? How do we share that power that we have? And I think that is for clergy, a very threatening thing at the end of the day. Like, we don't want to really talk about it, but what does it look like where clergy are just essentially distributors of the power that we're ordained to hold? And because all of a sudden, if everyone can do everything, then why do we need professional clergy?
This has been so I am a big nerd and I go to a lot of like I've been on a lot of Zoom calls with other pastors who are doing a lot of online stuff, and these are the questions everyone's asking, right? Is what is the balance between professional and production and getting it just right? It's kind of the question of, do you pre-record your entire service, much less just the sermon or whatever, or do you do it live? And some people, just based on the stress of trying to produce something live, have gone with the pre-recorded. So it's not always a theological idea behind it. It's just more of a stress thing. And that's also because a lot of them have had terrible failures in the midst of it, that they said, we don't want to do this anymore. We would rather have worship than it all fall apart and then not have a worship Sunday. But to me, I think you're right. The reason I've really loved doing it live is because there is a more authentic aspect to it, and I think that it does present a whole lot of challenges. And we're like White Rock's really lucky to have Dexter there that is really good with this, right? They can really pull it off regularly.
Not only
Um,
are we're lucky to have Dexter, we're also lucky that Dexter is a part of our community and is offering his gifts as a
totally.
um, offering his gifts to the community. So, like, not only do we have high professional folks, we're actually getting quite a deal on that whole thing too. And that's just because Dexter loves his church, right? And he
Right.
wants to, right? And so, yeah, we are lucky. There's no doubt. And I think that's the challenge, right?
Right.
I can't say blatant statements about pre-recorded worship because I realize every context is, but I know that if
Totally.
White Rock did pre-recorded worship, we would lose a part of what makes our community our community. And,
Yeah.
you know, you got to have the kind of like walk the tightrope. And if we make a mistake, like when I knocked over a microphone, like that's a part of who we are. Like, we make mistakes. It's important for I think the congregation to see our blemishes.
Yeah,
I
and that
agree.
definitely happens in
Yeah.
person too. So
Right, exactly. And that's why I think
Actually, it
it's okay
happens
to
far
fail.
more in person probably than it does here, because we're all like just really on the edge, to like make sure that we're minding our spots and but yeah, it happens in person a lot. Remember that time I totally like just invited the ushers like three times or like three spaces early? Do you remember that, Rebecca?
yeah.
I was just like, and now we're gonna invite the ushers for it. I was like, what?
And I looked at Farron and I was like, I guess we're doing the offertory now.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
I don't know where my head was. I don't know.
It happens. It
it
happens. But
does.
that's
It does.
that's part of the beauty of it, though, right? Is it like it feels more human that way, right? And it doesn't feel like a production as much as it feels like these are actual people engaging in a worship practice together, as opposed to you said distribute, Mitchell, right? Like, not even like let us distribute, but let us put this on for you. Like, this is what we all come together to do. And that's why I do love that liturgy means work of the people, because we all are coming together to work this together and to join together in common voice and in common exploration and wrestle. And to me, like, that's what worship is it should be about, I think. But
That's why I think. I mean, I hope my optimism is on display here, because this may not be true, but I really do hope that people who are in their homes truly are still participating. And I trust our community to know that if they can, they are reading along with the call to worship, or they are, even if they're chasing a kid around the house and they can't like sit down and read stuff, they're singing along if they know the words, or they're humming the tune. Like, they're pulling themselves bodily and vocally and mentally into participation. I really, really, truly hope that they feel the authenticity from our end and they are returning it, because I don't think any of our staff want it to be something that's just observed, right? It's not just something that you put on and watch, but that you're drawn in and you want to sit down and look at the comments because somebody's going to be saying something helpful, or you want to read along with the call to worship because it is going to challenge you.
Yeah.
and that's a change of vocabulary, right? Like, moving beyond this idea of, yeah, I watched worship yesterday, like, to this, say, like, even as a staff saying, like, no, like join us for worship. Don't tune in to watch. Like join us to worship online. There's
Yeah.
a mental block there too,
Yep.
right? That if that's what we're continuing to communicate, then um, it just changes the whole experience for people because of it's a mental thing too.
Well, and I am really grateful because I see that we have several people in our congregation who share our live feed and they say, "Hey, join me for church today. I'm attending church,"
Totally.
and I love that they are adopting that language.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah,
cool.
it's really cool. I mean, how cool would it be if we had to sit in this, space for a while, which we don't know when I saw last night Dallas County had a reduction in cases for the first time in a while. So, but who knows how long we're going to be in this? How cool would it be to like actually have an ability to like capture people worshiping in their space? That's kind of what we're saying. Like, hey, take a picture and tag us. But like, how cool would it be to like have a camera? Kind of like the NFL draft when they have the camera and it's just like a set. Rebecca, I know you don't watch the NFL draft probably, but that,
I know
no,
that's shocking to everybody
I
who's
know,
listening,
but
but yeah.
there's just this like one camera, that like captures the entire room of all these, different players with their families and stuff, like before they're drafted. I'm just thinking how cool would it be to like have kind of a live feed that we could show or tie together like a bunch of different families, like what does it actually look like in their homes and how are they participating and like where are they sitting. And it's been one of the things that like I've been most excited about, and I've said this, like the church has not been in the Methodist church, the United Methodist Church has not been in people's living rooms in a very long time. I
Yeah.
mean, we need to be real honest about that. Maybe there are churches that have done really good jobs with small groups, and maybe that's where, but the vast majority of people, church is at the church building,
Mhm.
and it's from this set time. The fact that the church is now entering into people's homes, I think, is a really holy thing. And how do we celebrate that, and how do we continue to encourage it as we move forward? Because a return to the building is not necessarily what the church needs moving forward. I mean, we need the same. We need corporate worship. We need to gather together, but we do not need all of our programming and all of our work to happen here. We really need it, the vast majority of it, to happen in people's homes and in people's neighborhoods. And so I'm excited about the possibilities, and we continue to have folks engage with worship on Sunday morning, and I'm we're looking at the numbers and the metrics, obviously, because that's a part of our responsibility. And I'm proud of our church for sticking with us and like making it worship for themselves instead of just another YouTube video, and a host of all the.
Phil was getting real excited. I just wanted to bring that out for people who are just listening, like, and not watching the video. Phil was, drumming his fingers together. His eyes are on fire. He's so excited about all these ideas.
It's
Yeah.
because I haven't even officially started yet, but I already have all these ideas of things that I'm ready to start throwing, and just to see what you guys are like. Oh no, we can't do that, or like, oh well, we could try that. So
Well, I think the offertory yesterday was an example of that.
Yeah.
It was kind of wild. It was kind of unusual. It was definitely not thematic. Often I try to make the music really tightly thematic, but yesterday it was a drum jam that we did. It was me and three other members of our congregation who are all percussionists, and I never turned down an opportunity for a drum jam. And we can't do it in person, so we worked with this app, a cappella, and layered, Ben Cargill played the bass and drums, so he was on there twice. I think that confused some people. That's funny.
Yeah. You have a twin?
You're right. Does he have a twin? But yeah, no, that kind of thing is like thinking way outside the box. How can we pull people's talents, people's energy? Where can we meet them with what they're already excited about, right? That's how the folk band was born. Where
Totally.
can we meet people where they're already excited about instead of trying to create a program that
Right.
somehow checks off metric boxes?
Right.
love it.
Yeah. And are you an idea guy though, Phil, that likes to see them all the way, the ideas all the way to the end?
Well, when you said yesterday that like you're an idea person that doesn't always see them all the way to the end, I was like, ooh, that's that's kind of where I am too.
Oh,
So
great. Now we have two of you on staff.
it's okay. It's okay. We'll have a whole conversation about this at some other point, but I do love
Off
ideas,
air,
and
out public.
that's right. That's right. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love ideas. Yeah, we'll talk about this more later.
Unbridled potential of a good idea, right?
Well,
Just
okay, so fours, fives, and nines are all withdrawing numbers. So
yeah.
it's really solid that you're a four and I'm a nine, and so here we are withdrawing. But it's fine. Enneagram, sorry.
Yes,
If you
Enneagram.
don't know Enneagram, but yeah.
Yep.
Anyway,
Well, friends,
we didn't
uh,
even talk about your sermon, which I think is
all
maybe a
right.
good thing,
What?
because we talk about sermon a lot. It's like
Yeah, this was a
it's
little bit
easy for that
different.
to be
Hmm.
the main focus of something like this. I'm curious if there's anything that either one of y'all heard out of it that just really you thought was a crux or just a really solid sticking point, or like a follow up question to go along with it.
I mean, Phil, I saw that you asked on your Facebook page, does everything happen for a reason? Just got like lots of outside, opinions. And so I think it's helpful. Mitchell, you presented your sermon like here are ways that this phrase can be helpful, and when it turns unhelpful is when we misuse it or overuse it. And so I think that framing is just going to be really helpful for
Right.
us throughout this series is does that phrase, do we mean harm? Of course not. But are there better ways to sit with people who are in pain? Yes. And sometimes that means, just embracing the awkward silence, saying, like, you can let that phrase go and maybe don't replace it, or maybe replace it with, I love you and I'm praying for you, or something like that.
I yeah, I think it's a phrase that we can say to ourselves. Like we have the freedom to do that. I think it's a phrase that we should abolish saying to others, though. And in not saying it to others, hopefully we can really put it in its proper place for ourselves and our own theology. Yeah, I think something along the lines of look like, I don't know, but I'm here and I believe that God's here. Something as simple as that. When I was pushed as a chaplain to like, people would ask me like, well, why did this happen? Why did my husband die of a heart attack suddenly? I mean, I don't know. There very well may be a medical reason for that. And so like, I would say you should take your questions to the doctor, but like theologically, or did God cause this? I don't know. I don't think so, but I do think that God's here now. And I think that's the tricky thing. We don't necessarily feel empowered to challenge the narratives, and there are definitely proper places to challenge them, and unhelpful places, and even more damage. We can do even more damage when we challenge them out of turn. But there are plenty of times where we've hear you know someone in the kitchen talking at the funeral where they've just set their casserole down and the family's mourning 2 rooms over, and you know um they're going on and on about how so God just needed another angel, or we God has a plan that's bigger than our grief, which is helpful,
Which is
but
which is true. I was gonna say, like, I
but
saw a diagram.
often that is not, they don't aren't thinking, they're not taking the next step theologically. And
Right.
so I'm saying, like, in those moments I think it is totally appropriate to say, I don't think so. Like, if we can feel empowered to do that, and that's a hard space to do it, but we hear this phrase in other places. If we can like challenge there, then all of a sudden we get a little bit of courage about our faith that we have for ourselves. And all of a sudden we can maybe push against a whole host of things. And I think part of it is getting the courage and the confidence that we have an alternative story that we can tell the world. Soft evangelism, standing up for racist comments. Like, I feel like we often feel like we don't have the right tools. And I don't think that's the case. I think that, we don't have to have answers to ask really good questions, or to say,
Yeah.
I don't believe that. But
Yeah, I think, I mean, to build on what you were saying, like there is a time and a place to challenge. I saw a helpful diagram because I think I know many people actually who are very well meaning, who do take that opportunity to challenge in unhelpful situations.
totally.
So like if a widow is saying, well, everything happens for a reason. I'm trying to figure out what happened to my husband. And they're like, do you really think everything happens for a reason? That's not the place. And so this diagram that was helpful to me is saying, who is in pain, they go in the center of the circle, and then whoever is most connected to that person, they go next, in the next ring. next ring, next ring, next ring. So like immediate family, very close friends, acquaintances, etc. It is only appropriate for you to challenge when you are looking outward from the circle. Do not ever challenge someone who is more intimately connected than you are, because that is not the loving pastoral place. So if you are a close family member, you don't get to challenge the widow. You do get to challenge like an acquaintance who says that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It would be awesome. Do you have access to that diagram?
Yeah,
I
you
could
should share
probably
that for
find
sure.
it.
Yeah, I'll try to put it in the show notes or something.
I remember the exact place I was when this idea was really challenged for me because so my dad died of brain cancer, but whenever he was first
How old are you,
diagnosed,
Bill?
I was 23 or 24 when he died, but when he was diagnosed, I was 23. And when I just moved to Dallas, actually, I moved in August, and he was diagnosed in September. And so every Tuesday night, I would go to a family's house and have dinner here in town. And I didn't know a lot of people when I moved here. And I remember after he got diagnosed, like I went to dinner, and the dad that was there, he said, "Hey, I'm just so sorry to hear about your father." And here I was, 23, and I was like, "Well, everything happens for a reason." And he just looked at me with like the kindest eyes, and he said, "I don't think there's a reason that your dad has brain cancer." And I remember just like melting, like it was just like this so dismantling for me,
Permission giving.
permission giving. And like here's where we're talking about half truths, right? Here's what a half truth for me about this statement is: I don't think everything happens for a reason. I think there's reason that everything happens, or
Yeah,
almost
cause and
everything, right?
effect, right? Yeah.
Right, like black matter, or like maybe we can't fully understand that. We're not sure the reason about all that, but like for the most part, like most things, we can put reason to why things happen, cause and effect wise. But the problem of that is, get back to scripture, tradition, reason, and experience, right? Like we're trying to use reason to explain things for our heart, and that's just not what happens. Like we try to use something from our head to soften the blow to our heart, and that's not what we need in the midst of
That's a good
grief and
word.
pain.
Yeah, that's a good word.
That's the
So
half truth for me.
next week is I think it is love the sinner, hate the sin.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Can't wait.
Tune in.
Tune in. Will join us in worship.
Join us in worship. Yes,
Join
yes.
us at the Pastor's Bible Study. That's Wednesday mornings at 8 a.m. We're going to be talking specifically about that. Also sign up for Rebecca and Jen's book study and stay engaged with this podcast. We're going to keep talking about this for the next few weeks. So yeah, good work.
And chime in on Phil's status question. Does everything happen for a reason?
Last I saw it
That's
was
some
up to
good
like 80,
discussion.
86 comments, so I got a little bit of work to do after I get off this to go respond to people.
Got kind of clean up a little bit,
Yeah, maybe.
right?
What's funny is one person said, "Well, isn't that in the Bible?" And I said, "Well, actually,
Hey,
no,
that's a great,
it's
yeah,
not."
totally. That's a
And then
good
I
question
tagged
starter.
White Rock, so
Yeah.
there you go.
Cool. All right, friends. Till next time.
Till next
Take
time.
care.
Bye. You're listening to a podcast recorded at White Rock United Methodist Church in the heart of East Dallas. For more information, you can find us at wrumc.org. And make sure you stay subscribed to this channel to stay up to date with all of our content.